Are you new to making sourdough and are confused about what you need to buy? Well, I'm going to go through all of the different things that I use to make sourdough, and if you haven't purchased any of these things yet or not sure whether or not you need them, I'm going to tell you what you could swap them for. So the first thing is a bowl. So you can use any bowl. I particularly like to use the ones from Mason Cash, but you can use any bowl. You can use glass, ceramic or metal, it doesn't matter. The next thing is a bread sling. This is going to help you take the bread in and out of the oven so that you don't burn yourself and it doesn't stick to the pan. Now you can use parchment paper as well, or you can use this, which can be washed up and made reusable. The next one is a contentious issue as to whether or not you should use a Dutch oven. That comes down to you and how you prefer to bake it. You can bake it inside a Dutch oven or you can do an open bake in the oven. The only thing is you do need to alter the temperatures and you do also need to create steam within the oven. Both of them make beautiful loaves of bread, and it comes down to you, what your preference is and what type of oven you've got and how many loaves it is that you want to bake. The next thing is a Banone. Do you have to use one for making sourdough? No, you absolutely don't. You could proof your dough in the fridge, in a bowl, or even in a colander as well. One of the beautiful things about a Banone is that it's breathable, so it does allow the dough to breathe. So if you put it in a colander that has holes in it, you can line it with a tea towel and it's still going to be able to breathe. But if you put it in a bowl, it's still going to make lovely bread as well. So if you don't have either of those things, a bowl will be absolutely fine, and just line it with a tea towel. You might have seen this nifty little contraption. This is not a tea strainer, that is a flour duster. Do you need one? No, absolutely not. Your hands or a spoon are absolutely fine. Does it make you feel extra fancy when you're making a sourdough? Absolutely, and I think it does give a more even spread of flour when you're dusting it before you put it in. The next thing is this, which is a probe thermometer. Do you need one? I do think that you do, because it's given me much more consistent bakes when I've taken the temperature of my dough, so I know how long to bulk ferment it for. I did take the temperature of the room, and then I started taking the temperature with this of the actual dough itself, and I realised that the temperature of the room and the temperature of the dough were very, very different. So that's really helped me get much more consistent loaves. The next one I do think is an absolute must, and that is a set of weighing scales. I do think that you need that to make sourdough. There'll be plenty of people that say that they make sourdough by doing approximate measurements using cups or just weighing with their heart, but I think to get a consistent loaf, a set of scales is going to be really, really helpful, especially for beginners. Then we've got water. Do you need to use filtered water? Now I do say filtered water quite a lot, but actually it's unchlorinated water. So there's many ways to get the chlorine out of the water. That can be that you boil the kettle and it removes the chlorine. You can, and then wait for it to cool down. You can leave a jug of water out overnight and then it evaporates. You can use bottled water, or you can use a water filter either through a fridge or one of the jugs with the filter in the top. It's entirely up to you, but if you're going to get a nice strong starter, you do want to be using a water that doesn't have chlorine in it. We've got dough scrapers. Do you have to have these? Absolutely not. Does it make it easier? Yes, it does. These are for when you want to scrape it on the side, for when you want to use a large dough and then cut it into pieces to make smaller loaves. These are going to be helpful, but you can do it with your hands or maybe with a knife or something. They're just very helpful, but you absolutely don't need those. Salt, I just use standard table salt for my dough, and this one is particularly cheap. I think it's under 50 pence for a great big pot, and that'll last me a very long time. I wouldn't recommend necessarily using one of the expensive premium salts for your dough, because you're not going to be able to taste it in the same way as if you sprinkled it on top, and that is going to help with your bulk fermentation. If you're making a lot of bread, you're going to use a lot of salt, so make sure you just go for standard table salt. The dough whisk. They do look a little bit odd. Do you have to use one? No, you don't. Why do we have it? It's because it incorporates the starter and the water together really well, and then incorporates the dough so it's nice and even when you stirred it all together. Can you use your hands? Absolutely. Can you use a wooden spoon? Yes, you can. Do you need this? No, you don't. Does it make you feel like a fancy sourdough baker? Yes, it does. The hairnet. Now, lots of people have said, can we use reusable ones? 100%. Can you just use a towel over the top? Yes, you can. The only thing I would say is if you put something over the top that doesn't seal it properly or isn't wet, you may end up with quite a dry loaf with a very thick crust on the top before you bake it, and some people say that they don't like that, so maybe try lots of different options to see which one works best for you. But this does keep a nice seal on the top of the dough whilst it's doing its cold proofing, and it does mean that it doesn't dry out and you still get a really beautiful loaf of bread. A bread lane, these little things, do you have to use these? No, you could just use a standard kitchen knife or something similar. This is going to give you a beautiful sharp score on your bread, and it's going to be able to show up patterns a lot better as well. So it is something I would recommend, but definitely not something that you absolutely have to use to be able to make sourdough. A jar. 100% yes, you do need a jar, and I would recommend a push top one. And the reason I say that is because your starter needs to be able to breathe, but you do not want bacteria getting in there, so you don't want anything where it's going to have the jar left open a little bit for bacteria to get in. And if you use one with a clip down lid, you may find that when you open it up, there's a lot of gases to escape, and it could crack the jar. It's never happened to me, but what has happened to me is the starter has become so active that it's popped out of the top of the jar. So if it hasn't got the push top, it's not going to be able to do that. And then lastly is the flours. You can use any flour, but I have found by lots of research and baking with a lot of flour, I found that the more premium flours with the higher protein content are going to give you a better loaf of bread. The higher the protein, the higher the price of the flour, but it doesn't mean to say that you can't bake a loaf of bread with a cheaper bag of flour. Both of them are going to give you a beautiful loaf of bread, but by using a more premium flour, you are going to get a better rise and a better flavour. This one here is my favourite, it's the Canadian. That's got a nearly 15 grams of protein in it, and I find that that worked really, really well for getting a beautiful rise on my bread. And then we've got the premium strong white bread flour from Matthews as well, and that one just makes my starter particularly active. But you can use any flour. If you're finding that you're struggling with your bread and you look at your starter and it's lovely strong and it's active, and you've done all your bulk fermentation and you're still not getting the rise on the bread, do have a little look at the flour that you're using and just make sure that it has got that lovely protein in it that's going to give you that lovely rise. This one here for the starter's got a protein content of about 13 grams, and then this one's got one of about 15 grams. So both of them are going to give you a lovely starter and a lovely loaf of bread. So if there's anything that I've missed that you use or that you don't use or that you swap for something else, do drop it in the comments, because I'd love to hear, because what I don't want to do is anybody to think that if they don't have all of these things that they're not able to make a beautiful loaf of bread. All of these things are going to help you make the bread and they're going to perfect it for you, but you are still able to make a beautiful loaf of bread without all of these. But these things do make it a little bit more fun.